Hi everyone, Shannon here with Therapy by Shannon. We're doing our Mental Health Louisville Ask Us Anything. And today we are honored to be with Robert Bobby Grubbs. He's a licensed clinical social worker, licensed drug and alcohol counselor, EMDR certified therapist, and also an EMDR approved consultant and trainer. He's a therapist and an owner of Grubbs Counseling and Consulting in Louisville, Kentucky. He does individual counseling sessions with individuals who are 13 or older and have been impacted by various forms of trauma or other adverse experiences. He currently does telehealth with his clients, and he does see some face-to-face clients in his office located in Louisville if those clients are unable to do telehealth for whatever reason. And if you want to learn more about him, you can just go to his site, simply Google his name or go to grubbscounseling.com. And guys, remember, if you have questions for us, these are all questions asked by you that we're getting answered by professionals in the field. So shoot us a DM and we will get that question answered for you. But thanks, Bobby, for being here today.
You're welcome. Happy to be here.
Yeah, our
Thanks
question.
for doing this.
Yeah, we really love these, and our audience does too. Our question for you today, though, is obviously we know we're still in the midst of the pandemic. We have a lot of frontline workers out there getting impacted in a very traumatic way, and we want to kind of know kind of how these frontline workers are getting impacted in this traumatic way and what happens kind of post that traumatic experience. Like, how is that really impacting these individuals' lives?
Yeah. I think the first thing to do would be to make sure that our audience understands like that broad definition of frontline worker, right? So we're talking about anybody who has client contact or contact with individuals who they're trying to support through, COVID, right? So, nurses, doctors, physicians, any hospital staff, basically, but it's a broad net, really. So the important thing I think first to embrace is that this is a global trauma. So unlike something we've ever seen before, so the entire population is getting impacted by this. That being said, there are specific parts of the population that are impacted obviously more, and that would be our frontline workers. So when we think about trauma, we think about it's very subjective. So it's all up to interpretation. We can put 15 people in a plane and the plane can go through turbulence and horrible stuff. And then when they get off, 15 different people can have 15 different reactions or responses to it. So it's very subjective. That's one of the things that people need to understand is that the brain doesn't differentiate horrible stuff. It just stamps it as horrible stuff. And that's what it calls it. So comparing our trauma to somebody else's trauma, it doesn't work that way. The brain can't self-differentiate that stuff. So one of the main things we've seen out of the research from the previous epidemics that we've had is that we see frontline workers suffer from a lack of access to accurate information, which causes increased anxiety, excessive worry, fear. This starts then to impact their sleep patterns, and then with COVID specifically, we have isolation that comes with it as a precaution to try to keep us from contracting the virus. So that and the sleep issue takes two of our natural coping abilities away, right? When we sleep, our brain tends to process unresolved stuff in the hopes of trying to resolve it, right? And then our social support systems help take some of that away. Well, I mean, our frontline workers, gosh, they got hit with two of their natural support systems being impacted significantly. So not only are they going through this trauma on a daily basis, but they also have this lack of support, which we typically would have in place had this been some type of other disaster. So we see the fatigue of every single day going into work, not knowing not only what's going on and the lack of accurate information, but also the polarization of this has caused another trauma for them. People that they thought might be supportive have spoken out on social media about how this is a myth, and that also has impacted their emotional well-being because it took away almost this natural support system that we think that we all have as humans, right? Like we see sick people and we feel bad for people who are sick, and therefore we support those people who care for the sick. That's something that we've all kind of not taken for granted, but we just assumed would always be there. And then it became this political issue, and now they have seen themselves actually unsupported, almost comparable to what veterans experience when they come back from serving overseas, right? This yanked from underneath you of the support system that they assume would be there. So they have this every single day. Add on to that just the normal interaction that they have with patients, right? So we've all seen on the news, not just the death and dying of patients, seeing people at nursing home windows and the nursing home staff having to kind of do that on a daily. That's partly the main trauma here too. It's this consistent daily trauma, right? This isn't just a one-time incident. So you have big T traumas, right, which are natural disasters, floods, earthquakes. We call those big T traumas because they're typically like one-time occurrences. They typically can be explained away, like natural disasters and floods, right? Earthquakes. We live on Earth; it tends to quake, therefore earthquakes happen. Why our system has reacted or responded the way it has, and why we have the lack of resources, lack of support, it's a lot harder for the brain to rationalize this. And so we'll take a nurse, for example, right? They go into the hospital on a daily basis. And as they go into the hospital, they have to ask questions as to why do we not have appropriate PPE? Why am I not getting the support that I need? And then what do we do about all these people that are dying in the hospitals? The exposure on a daily basis. So as that exposure every day starts to happen, the brain tries to figure out what to do with it. So you have basically two neural networks. So almost think of it as two tanks almost, right? And you have a positive neural network and a negative neural network. And our brain tries to adapt stuff over to the positive. So our brain has what's called an adaptive information processing system. So it's the brain's natural way of healing. When you trip and fall, your brain tells the body to take that scraped knee and start to patchwork it up and heal it, right? We used to think that the brain didn't know how to do that with trauma, right? Or with psychological injuries. And what we found is that it actually does. We just tend to get in the way. Our prefrontal cortex, which controls our impulse control and judgment and our higher thinking.
We're usually really good at getting.
Yeah. Yeah, we're great at getting in the way of it. So we get in the way of this natural tendency, right? But significantly disturbing negative events are encoded in the brain at a higher level. So the emotions and the body sensations are charged at a higher level, and therefore they're encoded, and they're a lot more difficult to kind of shake loose. So you think about a car wreck, maybe when you heard those screeching brakes behind you, and then that impact hits you, right? Well, the next time you hear screeching brakes, you're going to have an emotional and a physical response before your brain says, oh shit, right? Your body's going to tense up and you're going to have this overwhelming sense of anxiety happen, but only then will the thought come, right? So as this daily exposure happens, this negative neural network continues to compound and compound and compound with our frontline workers, and it leads to impacts in thoughts and behavior. So that's the important piece, is that they're experiencing the physical sensations of overwhelmed, of unsupported, of mass confusion. Those physical sensations are the emotions as well too, of confusion, unsupported, right? Those are what make up the neural network, right? The emotions and the body sensations. The thoughts don't come till later, right? So initially, our frontline workers are in this trauma phase where they have these unresolved emotions and physical sensations that are going on in their bodies constantly with this trauma that's happened. And it starts to impact, again, sleep quality, social support systems, the fact that everybody's experiencing it around them. Sometimes healthcare workers struggle to, we know this as therapists, like sometimes healthcare workers struggle to ask for help in general, right? It's this like reverse stigma almost, right? Like we can't help because we're the helpers. That is now compounded again because of the lack of access to healthcare. The healthcare system itself is being stretched and spread thin. I've been doing some support groups for a local health department, and they definitely canceled one of theirs because they had too much work to do. Yeah. And it's like, yeah, you get it, right? The system's spread thin. As healthcare workers get sick, they have other healthcare workers who try to fill in for them. So they almost don't have a chance to pause. And that's more damaging as this continues to compound.
No recharging, no break, no.
Yeah. Yep. So with that comes that increased uncertainty. We have increased substance use from that, increased drinking, ways of coping, increased eating, unhealthy eating, all those things that come with trying to stave off or
Mhm.
almost really just either stave off, decrease, desensitize, or stun these emotions and body sensations that they're carrying with them as a way of trying to just cope, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And I know we're going to talk a little bit later about what can actually help heal and what these individuals can do kind of post these traumatic situations and this prolonged exposure. Everyone has had to this, but kind of on a
Mhm.
very heightened increased risk with the frontline workers. But any kind of like little teaser or like tidbit or like help or anything you want to leave the end of this video with of like, yeah, like, so what do we do with this?
Yeah, yeah. The main thing I think is that to listen to our bodies. We're so disconnected sometimes as a society. I tell my clients that we listen to our bodies when we eat White Castle, but we don't listen to our bodies when we're go through stuff, right? And so the important thing is to start to become more familiar with your body. As frontline workers, we need to know, like, when are we feeling tension, when are we feeling anxious, when are we feeling restless, right? And start to connect with that. The nice thing I like about EMDR, about eye movement desensitization and reprocessing therapy, is that it targets that holistic part of the person. So it takes care of the body sensations, the emotions, and then the cognitions that come with all those things.
Mhm.
But the first thing I would say is just be aware of your body. We need to start knowing when we're overextended. We can recenter ourselves, but I think the first step is about knowing yourself and knowing the symptoms and signs that come with that. I 3 or 4 months into this pandemic, I went to my dentist's office because I thought I had a cavity, and I was like, oh gosh, got a cavity, I better go get it checked out. And I go, and she's like, no, everything's good. And she's like, I bet you're clenching your jaw. And I'm like, I'm what? And she's like, yeah, you think you're clenching your jaw from the stress from this thing? And I'm like, I guess so, right? So I got a bite guard, and sure enough, that's what was happening. So my point in that is that it finds a way in.
Yeah.
And the important thing is just to not think of ourselves as invincible, but thinks of ourselves. We have a very human brain, and we need to acknowledge that and support it. And part of that is getting to know our body. So
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah. Oh, I love that. Thank you so much, guys. Remember, if you want to get in touch with Bobby, go to grubscounseling.com. He is going to be doing another video. So catch that when it comes out too. And remember, if you guys have questions, just DM us and we'll get them answered. Thanks.
thanks so much.